All right, welcome into the JC Sports. I'm your host, Joe Chap. We're going to be talking about the Detroit Tigers today because the Detroit Tigers made some moves, not some bold moves, not some huge moves. Actually, none of them really moved the needle. I think the biggest one that moved the needle was Kyle Finnegan, the closer from the Washington Nationals. Did the Tigers get better? It remains to be unseen, but they made some moves. They made a lot of moves, actually. They acquired um, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero from the Braves, Paul Sewald, who could be coming back in September, should come back in September, Chris Paddock, who just made a start yesterday, and Cody Hewer, who he's going to report to AAA, Randy Dobnik, who is going to obviously report to AAA. The Tigers made some moves, and a lot of people are still upset, and they have the right to be upset about the lack of urgency when you're in a championship window. And I'm not going to sit here and say that the Detroit Tigers made any good moves. I'm not going to say that. What I am going to say is when you have a top farm system like the Detroit Tigers have, the bargaining price for you is sometimes higher. And some teams will never really come back on their price. And it was clear today that the Tigers really didn't want to give up any of their top 10 prospects because this is what John Paul Morosi said. He said the Tigers are said to be reluctant to part the top prospects to acquire Suarez, given that A, he is a rental, and B, Detroit has more pressing needs in the bullpen. And the major thing that came out of that was he went on 97 the ticket, and he also said that Max Anderson was a cog in the wheel. Now, there's Seattle reporters and Arizona reporters that say Seattle had the arms to give Arizona, and that's what Arizona ultimately wanted. But you could see how things could have been perceived. David Bednar went to the Yankees. Ryan Hesley, who was rumored to be in Detroit, going to Detroit, he went to the Mets. And that's just the way it goes. Now, there's a lot of things to dissect with this whole trade deadline. There was no big move. There was no move that you were like, oh my god, this makes him an instant contender. But what this does do is a couple things. One, you didn't give up any good prospects. You didn't give up a Max Clark, Ken McGonigal. We talked about that. Brasenio, uh, Lorenzo, Brainer. You didn't even give up Max Anderson. And whatever you believe, either you believe the Tigers are in a championship window or you don't believe they're in a championship window. And just by my reading of things, I don't think Harris thinks that you're in a championship window. I mean, you honestly could say you're in a championship window. John Paul Morosi of MLB Network said that you're in a championship window, but you got 2 years left of school ball, maybe 1 year. This might be the last year. If Harris wants to be aggressive, maybe Harris thinks that Max Clark, Kevin McGonigal, that's the window. They'll find a pitcher, but when Skubal leaves, that's not the end of their window. And most people will look at that and they will say, well, who's going to be pitching? Well, no one who knew who Tarek Skubal was before he was Tarek Skubal. So Scott Harris has been reluctant to give up prospects, especially for rentals, and that's a smart move. Whenever you trade prospects for a rental, there's two things that could happen. Two things. It could bomb. The guy that you traded for could bomb. The prospect you traded for could just be a star. Or the B of it is you could trade a prospect, you could trade a player to get the rental player, and then when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter in the end of all of it because the Tigers, unless you win the World Series, does those trades really matter? Potentially no. So the Detroit Tigers are going to have to figure out what they're going to do at the next couple of trade deadlines, especially with Skubal being in the last year of his contract next year. The pending MLB lockout, which could play into the way Scott Harris is thinking. And look, the only teams that were really aggressive in terms of being aggressive and getting the players were the Phillies, The Blue Jays with Shane Bieber was a pretty sizable one. The Mariners getting Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez is sizable. The Yankees getting David Bednar. So look, the Tigers believe that they can just win. Like we all forget last year they were 6 outs away from going to the ALCS. They're obviously a good team. Now, there's some players that are on the roster that weren't on the roster last year, like Gleyber Torres, like Jack Flaherty, and those things will be worked out. Now, obviously, Reese Olson being gone is going to be interesting, but this is how this thing has been put together by Scott Harris. And just seeing what he did at the trade deadline, it leads me to believe that he doesn't believe this is the biggest window. And what I mean by the biggest window is he doesn't think that trading for a player is going to lead to instant success. And Scott Harris's job is not just to think about the present, but to think about the future of the organization. And no matter how you slice it, no matter how you go about it, today he did think about the future of the organization. He did make the right moves for the Detroit Tigers. He didn't give up any of his premium prospects. He got bullpen help. And if you said there was one major cog for the Detroit Tigers, I would have said maybe the bullpen. Tommy Canley, who you got from in the offseason, hasn't been that reliable. Yesterday he goes in, you're beating the heck out of the Diamondbacks. He lets up a home run, lets up a base hit. The bullpen was a pressing issue. I think Kyle Finnegan will help you out. And when we look at the statistics of the players that are coming to Detroit, I mean, you got Chris Paddock, 111 innings, 4.95 ERA, 128 WHIP. Rafael Montero, I've watched him with the Braves, not the greatest, but maybe Chris Fetter can work his magic. 34.1 innings, 5.50 ERA, 1.40 WHIP. Paul Sewald, 15.1 innings, 4.70 ERA, 1.17 WHIP. And then you had Kyle Finnegan, 39 innings, 4.3 WHIP, ERA, 128 WHIP. And then you have Cody Hewer, who's only pitched in one inning, 6.75 ERA, and a 70.75 WHIP. So those are the guys that the Tigers acquired. It's not the most, great deadline for the Detroit Tigers, but it wasn't a deadline where they pushed the envelope and got worse. They could have stayed pat. I thought that incrementally they did get better. Did they get better like people assumed they would? Going and trading for Eugenio Suarez, going out. Once Suarez was out the picture, there was no bats to go take a look at. The Braves had Marcell Ozuna potentially on the trade block. Atlanta Braves writers have said no, he's not on the trade block. The Detroit Tigers don't need an outfielder. They need a bat. And obviously the bat that they wanted, Suarez, came at a hefty price for a rental. And that's the thing that the Detroit Tigers are going to have to really put down. They're going to have to really figure out if this is the right way to go about things. We'll see what happens in the postseason. But Scott Harris obviously was thinking about the future. He did make his team better in the present. How much better, we're about to see. Did they need that bat that they could have needed? Yes. Did they get it? No. But the pitching, the bullpen is better, and we'll see how that works out going into the future with this Detroit Tigers team. As always, stay tuned to this JC Sports YouTube page, and we'll see you in the next video. I think it was smart for Scott Harris not to go out and make some bold move that was for a rental. That didn't make much sense. We'll see how it pans out. We'll see how Suarez does in the second half. We'll see how the Mariners do in the second half, and we'll see how the Tigers do going into the postseason. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least. We'll see you in the next video as we talk more Detroit Tigers baseball.